Okay, we're just going to have to take this as it stands and hope the quality comes out fine the other side of this. But if we just keep it locked in one place, we should be going fine. So recently there has been debate happening in New Zealand around population figures, how the projections have been out and the consequences of this, and both with housing, transport, economy, environment, mental well-being, and so on. So what are the consequences? More to the point, what has happened, what has led to this? And what can we do about it to avoid it happening again in the future? Now I'm just going to leave this. Whoop. We'll just stay at this intersection here as everyone goes about their business and it's rush hour in the game. So 10 days ago an article popped up on the New Zealand Herald, and it's behind the paywall, so it is a paid subscription, but I will put the link in the video and in the blog post below, on how 15 years ago it was projected that we would not hit 5 million people until 2030. However, we are due to hit 5 million people next year. So why are we 30 years out on our projections? And why? And what are the consequences for this? Now, this video will be uploaded into my blog at Ben Cities and Talking Southern Auckland later on. So if you miss it today or the stream just drops out for whatever reason, you can go and watch it later on today when I upload it. So the article concerned was Liam Dan's New Zealand population prediction was out by 30 years and the price we are paying. So 15 years ago in 2004, it was projected by Stats New Zealand, and the central government and Auckland Council ran with it since, or for Auckland Council in 2010's case, is that we were not due to hit 5 million until 2050. Per the census and population projections last year and this year, we're due to hit 5 million this year. What are the consequences? Well, for housing, we're short. Transport is a mess. While we do have low unemployment, remember that's only registered unemployment. It doesn't include jobless, and it also has pressures on our physical and human environments. Physical environments such as water and air quality, social environments such as our mental health well-being. The article goes on to say that back between 2004 and the global financial crisis of 2008 to around 2012, so we'll use that period, the geographies were a little bit different then to what they are now. However, warning signals were given away back then that we did not heed. So back between 2004 and the global financial crisis of 2008 to 2012, the thing called a little aspect called the brain drain was underway. So natural birth rates had dropped below 2.3, which is the replacement rate for New Zealand, and net migration out, especially to Australia, was higher than what was coming in. So your population growth was extremely sluggish. However, post-financial crisis, further complicated by geopolitical instability in the Northern Hemisphere with Brexit and Trump. We now have a situation where the brain drain is no longer in effect. We now actually are now suffering from, well, when I say suffering, the consequences of this is the suffering part, but our migration is continuing to hit peak record levels year in, year out. And while nationwide the birth rate is still below replacement, you've got pockets such as South Auckland, the East Coast, and Northland that have birth rates, natural birth rates above 2.3, so it is above the replacement rate, which means you've got natural population growth as well. Combine the two together, and with your population projections 30 years out, what do you get? We're short on housing, we're short on transport. Economy is not firing properly, productivity is still technically defined as negative. Our waterways are in a bit of strife, our air quality is hopeless, and mental health wise, we're on edge. And that can be measured ultimately in the suicide rate being double the road toll year in, year out. Particularly among men, particularly of those under 40, and particularly in Māori and Pacifica ethnicities. This is not a good thing. So I'm just going to let you digest that fact, and I'll give you the population figures as it stands now. We're just shy of 5 million. Auckland stands at 1.75 million, so this is the reference I'm going to use. There is the official figure of 1.54 from Stats New Zealand and the census. However, due to census issues, no fault of Housing New Zealand, most people won't come to use that figure. They'll use the current projection figures of 1.75 million in Auckland until the population figure projection figures are readjusted again. So I'll be using the 1.75 million figures there and the breakdown of those population figures by sub-region from there. So that's the two figures I'll be using. One, New Zealand's at about 4.9 million, Auckland's at 1.75 million. So as of 2019. So those are the two figures I'm using now. So I'll just let you just digest those thoughts for a minute and maybe grab a drink or so, and then we'll start tucking right in. You can just watch the traffic going around. It's currently 5:42 on a Thursday in the game, so it is currently rush hour. So people are going home for the evening. Right. First part, let's take a look at the article at hand. It's linked, it is behind the paywall, so you will need a subscription. So starting from the top, people. We're going to start from the top. 2004 Statistics New Zealand dropped the presser, saying we would hit 5 million people by 2050. This is when the brain drain was underway. This is when population figures were extremely low. Fast forward to 2019, and we're due to hit 5 million people next year, so the projections are 30 years out. What happened over those 15 years? Well, as I just mentioned earlier in the introduction, the brain drain is now reversed, and we're now getting net migration levels. And this is owed to the global financial crisis and the geopolitical instability in Australia, the United States, and Britain. Consequently, because our projections are 30 years out and our infrastructure was planned to it, so this is physical, transport and civic infrastructure, we've been planning along those 2004 projections, and as a result, our infrastructure is technically, and housing is technically 30 years behind. But there is a but to this, and it's a rather big but. We went through our first housing and house pricing boom between 2005 and 2008, which is, even with the then Metropolitan Urban Limit in play, suggesting we weren't building houses fast enough for even supposed low birth rates. Thus, housing prices began to run away. So the warning instruments were already in place. The warning bells were already in place that long ago. Yet we have failed to adapt. So that is interesting in itself. And this failure leads the government, both Labour and National, to do something about it. And net migration has actually, according to Liam, averaged about 25,000 for the past 15 years and has been closer to 50,000 for the past 7. So, and I think it's standing at 55, if not 63,000 at the moment. So we've got huge migration coming in. Young people aren't leaving for Australia as quick as they are quick. In fact, we've actually still probably got more Kiwis coming back than Kiwis going over. And again, we've got geopolitical instability in place, which is causing even higher migration. Furthermore, we also have high natural birth rates in some places like South Auckland, the east coast of New Zealand, and Northland. Multiply that all together, and what do you get? A recipe for chaos and disaster. Fast forward to 2011 to now, and I'm going to zero in on Auckland. The warning bells were given away even the global financial crisis that Auckland was going to go through another massive population boom, and the fact that our housing wasn't going to clear up. We stand at 1.75 million now. We have a housing deficit, I think it stands at 75,000. And even with record building and resource consenting underway for housing, that is barely keeping up with a population growth as it stands. It has not made any dent in clearing out the existing 75,000 housing deficit. Now, on the 3-to-1 ratio, so 3 people to a dwelling on average, which allows for singles, young couples, and large families, because we're a diverse city. That means we're short of housing before we even take in new population through births and migration of about 215,000 people. Now, currently, and just going to my statistics here, 215,000 people is the equivalent of, and let me just check the figures here and let me use the current projection figures. That's about a quarter. No, sorry, that is about a third of Southern Auckland's population as it currently stands at about 614,000. So already it would be like not housing a third of Southern Auckland's population. Oh dear. What happened? Why did we get into this absolute and utter pickle? From 2012 to 2012, when the Auckland plan was set, there you had what the growth trajectories based on projections. At the same time, you also had where the infrastructure should sit. So for both, it is low, medium, or high, or ultra in rare circumstances. In the 2012 Auckland Plan, and subsequently it flowed through to the Unitary Plan, Auckland Council and its planners had set our growth trajectories on medium. We were not due to hit 2 million until 2032, or New Zealand wasn't due to hit 5 million to that 2050 rate. Infrastructure subsequently was set to medium. You usually keep them matched together. However, it was noticed by some, including geographers like myself, that population growth was picking up both in natural birth rates and migration. The brain drain had reversed. People were coming home. People were wanting to set up home here from overseas due to our stability, regardless if we have a national or Labour government. New Zealand has enjoyed stability since post-World War II, even with the Roger-Norman reforms in the 80s and early 90s. So some of us had warned Auckland Council and the planners that all the way back in 2012, we need to set our population growth to high. Now, it was subsequently set to high, but the infrastructure was still set to medium, rather than being brought up to high. So already you are creating a gap. In a perfect situation or ideal situation, your infrastructure is set to what your growth trajectories are. So if your population growth is high, your infrastructure is set to high as well. If it's medium, it's medium. It's low, it's low. If it's ultra, then central government might need to be cooling us down rather quickly, because that's getting a bit out of control. But the councillors of the time between 2012 and 2015, backed by the planners in their infinite wisdom, decided to set the Auckland plan population trajectories to high, but keeping the infrastructure to medium, meaning we're going to have a gap automatically in place, let alone trying to clear out any deficits that might start to accumulate. Whereas if the population growth is set to high, your infrastructure is high, 1 for 1. 2017-18, the Auckland plan was reset, and it's now called the Auckland Plan 2050. And this time, the councillors and the planners in their infinite wisdom, even though the census wasn't out, but the population projections certainly were, and having us at 1.75 million, which is where we currently sit, they set us to population growth medium and infrastructure remaining on medium, despite the fact we were facing record migration and birth rates were starting to track up again, especially in southern Auckland. As my generation and our younger siblings, so millennials, and now starting to hit the Gen Zs, are starting to have their families, or are in the middle of having their families, more to the point. Oops, sip of tea moment. But yet, despite this, the council and the planners decide to, in their infinite wisdom, to keep the trajectory at medium and infrastructure to medium. Now, I'll let you think about what the problem is going to be there for a moment while we just take a quick drink break. Okay, so the question is, record migration, birth rates heading up in some parts of the city to above replacement rate. We already have a housing deficit of 75,000, which is enough for 210,000 people thereabouts, or a third of South Auckland's population as it currently stands. Yet we're keeping our population trajectory at medium and our infrastructure set to medium after previously was set to high and medium respectively. Problem. Your deficit's going to get larger. Now, how it is worked out, how it should ideally be worked out, is that the reason why it should be set to high, your population is set to high and your infrastructure is set to high, is it recognises the migration, recognises the birth rates, and the infrastructure keeps pace with it. Now, apparently the councillors and the planners concerns in 2012 and again in 2018, when the Auckland plan was set and revised, is that we would run an infrastructure surplus. New Zealand, let alone Auckland, running an infrastructure surplus is Okay, sure. This country's never run an infrastructure surplus in its life. It doesn't know how to. And the reason for being that is we follow what's called the infrastructure deficit model. For more on that, see the video linked to the right there on using Pirata as an example. New Zealand has never run an infrastructure surplus model where we follow like Japan. Your infrastructure is built first, then your urban, and then your zones are set down, and the urban development is set off. New Zealand, particularly Auckland, does it the other way around. We set the zones down, let the urban development go, and then come back and do the infrastructure 30 years later. Note 30 is becoming one heck of a theme here. And we wonder why the roads are jammed, the water quality is absolutely stunk, the air quality is even worse, and we're stuck on the motorway for lengthy periods at a time, or stuck on ever full bus or train services. It's because we follow the infrastructure deficit model because we're setting our population trajectories and infrastructure trajectories too low. So by setting it both on high, you're recognizing migration is high, the birth rates are picking up, and as a result, your infrastructure needs to be set to high as well to keep match of. Well, technically, it's not keeping match of population growth. It's actually technically running slightly ahead. Does that create an infrastructure surplus? Technically, yes, but that's a good thing, and this is why. The projections are done quarterly, yes, but the primary projections are done yearly because we also look back as well to see what has actually happened. But the census is only done every 5 years to confirm it. So by having a small surplus ahead, say from now on we're going to have our population growth set to high and the infrastructure set to high because we've been good in the past and everything is caught up. So the reason why you have a small surplus in there is for the sheer fact the best projections are done yearly, but the census is not done until every 5 years to confirm it. So by having a small surplus set in there, it allows for two factors to happen. Example 1, the migration or birth rates for the last quarter had spiked, so they had gone above the trend for the year. The second one is natural birth rates were natural birth rates went slightly higher, or we've taken domestic migration is slightly higher into a set area. So you've got international and domestic migration as well as birth rates. It also recognises the fact bringing housing and infrastructure online takes 3 to 5 years through the consenting process, let alone funding. So by having a small surplus in there, it allows to absorb the spikes through migration or birth rates that might occur because infrastructure is an ongoing thing. It just allows that absorption to happen when that spike is in place. The second reason is redundancy capacity, especially with New Zealand. Example, Kaikoura quakes knocked out Wellington. Thus, as a result, the port was knocked out, so we're having to move things through Napier and Auckland to Christchurch through rail and coastal shipping. So by running your infrastructure slightly ahead, it creates creates a bit of fat on the infrastructure system, a bit of resilience to absorb shocks further down the line. So your infrastructure is able to take the increased load that might otherwise happen because somewhere else down the line it's been knocked out due to a natural disaster. So that's why you always run your infrastructure and housing slightly ahead. One is to take take a spike in population growth that wasn't picked up. 2, it's to create resilience if somewhere else another population centre is being knocked out due to a natural disaster for whatever it is, as we saw with the Kaikoura quakes. So that's why you run it slightly ahead. That's why you do not set your population growth to high but your infrastructure at medium, because you're scared of a deficit. And if you want to know what happens when you do have the two mismatched, so infrastructure medium and population growth set to high, we only have to look at it now. Auckland's infrastructure is barely coping as it stands. It's amazing Auckland Transport's able to hold congestion levels as they are. And our housing is barely keeping up, but we're not clearing up that deficit. So in this case, this is a rare case where you have to set population growth to high infrastructure is set to ultra to try and get ahead to clear, and that ultra's got to hold until the deficit is cleared. Once the deficit is cleared, then you can go back down like for like. So were the institutes warned? Yes, they were, as I alluded to earlier. The institutes were warned in 2012 and in 2018 when the Auckland plan was set. Yes, population growth is set to high, but the infrastructure needs to be brought to match. Our population figures are 30 years out. That's massive. And there's a reason why Auckland's not coping. So how do we fix it? Our population trajectories still need to be maintained high. We've still got record migration and birth rates are starting to pick up again. But our infrastructure is going to need to be set to ultra, i.e. we're actually building more infrastructure than what the population growth current is, so we're able to clear out a deficit. It's going to be expensive, I'll give you that, but it's just something we're just going to have to do. Bit like this motorway not coping here. So that brings to the second part of the argument. We've missed the last 30 years, good and proper. So we're 5 million next year, and Auckland will hit 2 million about, it was meant to be originally 2032, but it's now going to be about 2028, probably 2025 if not sooner. So, part 2. 30. Let's look to the next 30. We've lost the last 30 due to projection misfiring, and in Auckland's case, the council and the planners not really paying attention properly and listening to those who might be a bit more at the coalface. So with that gone, let's look ahead to 2050, given that it is 30 years away in 4 weeks' time. So for me, it's called the 6-3 1.5 2050 projection. That is based on current trajectories and current geopolitics, especially with climate change now factoring into the matter. New Zealand will be at 6 million, Auckland will be at 3 million, so it's going to house half the population, and Southern Auckland, our current fastest and largest growing sub-region, which houses 39% of the city's population currently, will be at 1.5 million. The only sub-region in Auckland to do so, to be above 1 million itself. The Isthmus might be just nudging it, but Southern Auckland will be definitely above 1.5 million. So I'll say that again. 2050, 6 million in Auckland, 6 million in New Zealand, 3 million in Auckland, 1.5 million in Southern Auckland, currently the fastest and largest growing sub-region in Auckland, and the only sub-region to go above 1 million itself with the Isthmus, technically not that far behind. What are the consequences going to be of that? Our planning is going to have to be tipped up on its head. The current system's not working, especially if the planners and the governing body of Auckland Council are still transfixed on medium growth, population growth, medium infrastructure, where it should be set to high and ultra to at least clear out any deficits. Our planning is just going to have to share fact. It's going to need to change. It's going to need to be upended to cope with 3 million people in Auckland and with half of that again in Southern Auckland itself. How is the transport system going to cope? How is the housing going to cope? Where are all the jobs going to be? How are our natural resources going to cope? And something I haven't mentioned, but I will mention for the very first time: energy. Because just like we can't keep sending people up through the Isthmus choke point at Otahu on the Southern Motorway and the rail line to work in the city centre from the south, the transmission grids are going to be able to bring all that electricity up from Huntly and further south into Auckland either. So how do we cope with 3 million in Auckland and 1.5 million in South Auckland by 2050? Big call, but given we've missed the last 30 years in our trajectories, let's be a little bit bold. If population growth doesn't match that, we got away lucky, but at least the infrastructure's in place, unlike it currently. First thing we're going to need to do is recognise the Twin Cities model. Manukau, Auckland City Centre. Both are already produce 20% of Auckland's GDP, respectively, thus 40% of Auckland's GDP together, or 7.4% of national GDP each, or just over 14% combined. So the first thing we're going to need to do is recognise the Twin Cities model. Why? Because it goes into the second thing, urban islands. Southern Auckland is going to be literally a city in its own right. We can't send people north to work. The transport system will never ever cope. So we have to establish the urban islands, which are semi-independent but interdependent systems, and where people are more likely to stay home because of local amenity, local employment, thus cut down the need for cross-city commuting. So we have to do that. Energy-wise, 2050, going to make a call. We'll be running nukers here, if not in Auckland itself, definitely by replacing honey. It's going to be the only energy system that's not only climatic proof, but large enough and with a low capacity factor over 90%, that's able going to give us power, district heating or district cooling, desalination of fresh water, and also produce other energy needs such as synthetic hydrogen and chemicals. This is a city we do have industry. And we're just going to have to recognise the fact Auckland's going to be a twin city, urban island city here on in. 6 million in New Zealand, 3 million in Auckland, 1.5 million in South Auckland. Those are my projections as a geographer and trajectories on Auckland's growth and New Zealand's growth through to 2050, the next 30 years. We certainly were 30 years out in the last set. Let's not get it wrong this time. And I do plea to the councillors and to the planners, think about this carefully. You've already seen that we were out by 30 years, and we've lost those 30 years, and the consequences are showing up in our transport, housing, economic environment situation. Let's not get the next 30 years wrong. Let's get that 30 years right. So again, 6 million in New Zealand, 3 million in Auckland, 1.5 million in South Auckland, and we are going to start having to rely on nuclear to provide our energy and technically water needs as well. I am Ben Ross. I am an urban geographer, and I thank you for listening to this stream. I stream City Skylines on Mondays and Fridays, 10 AM on a Monday, GMT plus 13, and on Fridays at 8 PM, GMT plus 13. If you'd like to support the channel, donations can be made through PayPal below. All major currencies, including the New Zealand dollar, are supported. Subscriptions, follows, bits, and likes are greatly appreciated. And I thank you everyone for being here today in this impromptu stream on urban geography, getting our population projections wrong by 30 years and the consequences it has caused to our infrastructure and housing, and how we've got to get the next 30 years right with 6 million people in New Zealand, 3 million in Auckland, and 1.5 million in southern Auckland alone. In the meantime, Christmas shop safe, everyone.